Good evening and welcome back. You're watching World Talks and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwinska. Anti-government protests in Serbia continue, with demonstrators blocking the streets of major cities and clashing with the local police. It seems to be the case that President Vučić is willing to use force to calm the situation down, while the EU remains quiet about the recent events in Belgrade. So why is the escalation taking place now, and what could be the long-term consequences? We will discuss the next wave of protests shaking Serbia and the potential consequences of these turbulences with Ivan Vejvoda, permanent fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna. Good evening and thank you for joining me on the program.
Good evening.
So to some of our viewers, it might be unclear what the situation is and what is currently happening in Serbia. So why are these protests taking place?
Well, let's remind our viewers that this all started in November with the collapse of a roof, a canopy of a railway station in the second largest city of Serbia, Novi Sad, which killed 16 innocent people. There was a reconstruction going on, and clearly because of corruptive activities, the work was done in a very shoddy manner, and this roof, this canopy collapsed. The students which arose to protest this catastrophe and ask for responsibility and accountability to uncover all the processes that led to these corrupt activities have still not been fulfilled. And so these ongoing protests, there haven't been really any interruptions since late November. We're now into the 8th month of protests, and there were several very big demonstrations over the course of these months. The last one was on Saturday that gathered 140,000 people in the center of Belgrade. And the demand that the students have, apart from their initial demand to ask for accountability for this tragedy, is now to have anticipated elections. And that is what is now being discussed. The government refuses, and thus the blocking of the streets is an ongoing manifestation of this demand to have those elections.
So at this point, we see the protests continuing not only in Belgrade, but countrywide. Do you think that the change in the government, seismic change in the government, is inevitable, or are we going to see more violence in days and weeks to come for the government to curb it?
Well, several things need to be underscored. First of all, the student-led movement that initiated what we could poetically or metaphorically call the awakening of Serbia led to a broadening of this protest into a full civic protest in all of Serbian cities across various professional activities, among artists, among trade unions, among lawyers, among judges and prosecutors. These demands were slowly translated into this key political demand now, and that is to have anticipated elections that should lead to a change in government, which would lead to actually uncapturing or freeing the state institutions. The key demand is return to the rule of law, return to independent judiciary, checks and balances between the governmental institutions, the judiciary and the legislative. And those are, in fact, the demands that the European Union, about a month and a half, has said are the demands as well of the European Union. So there's a concomitance, there's a parallelism now in what the protesters are demanding and what the EU is demanding of Serbia. And we need to remind, again, your viewers that Serbia is not only a candidate country to join the European Union, but repeats every day, its government repeats every day, that this is the strategic orientation of Serbia to join the EU.
How very strategic of them to try and curb student protests. This takes me to my next question. How do you think that this current situation and the escalation of violence is going to influence the relationship between Serbia and the EU?
Well, indeed, this strategic orientation that is rhetorically declared every day has not, unfortunately, been fulfilled in practical terms because Serbia has not advanced on its European path in the past 3 years. In technical terms, it has not opened any new chapters or clusters, as they are called, in the EU integration process. The government is, as I said, refusing to have anticipated elections. Regular elections are only now foreseen at the beginning of 2027. And so what we could see is a protracted process where the government stays in power. And then actually opinion polls are showing that the ratings of the government and of the president have significantly fallen. This was shown as well in 2 local elections that took place at the beginning of this month of June. There will be a rerun of part of that election as well. And so it is clear that there is a desire for change of government. The escalation of violence that we have seen on the part of the regime, and it is important to note that the protests have key demands in terms of nonviolence and that any change has to happen through elections and not in any other way. And so the government is carrying on a fear tactics. It is arresting students who are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old, accusing them that they are terrorists, that they want to unseat the government and to change the constitution, which most people find not credible at all.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that this escalation perhaps could have anything to do with some sort of Russian meddling?
The government has consistently accused the protests of being funded from abroad, sometimes from the West, sometimes from the East, sometimes very undefined external sources, but this is not credible to anyone, frankly, because this is a homegrown grassroots protest which is predicated upon the fact that this young generation, whom we were totally unsuspecting that they could achieve something like this, because we all thought that they were not interesting, that they were TikTokers, that they wanted to get a diploma and leave the country. In fact, have decided to make a stand. They said, this is our country. We want to live here and we want it to be democratic based on the rule of law. And we know that we have to change it. And we know that we cannot depend on any help from the outside for this. And that is what creates the determination and commitment of the protesters, which I repeat, is now a full civic protest as well.
In any case, do you think that the EU specifically can afford to have Serbia drift further away from it at this current point in time?
No, certainly not. And Serbia and the protests, interestingly, do not want to drift away. And the government rhetorically does not want to drift away. The government has come, in fact, under accusations from Russia that it is supporting militarily Ukraine much too much. President Vučić himself traveled to Ukraine, to Odessa, to a summit with the Western Balkan countries. He sent his wife to Kiev several times. So there is a sort of a balancing act that he is engaged in that is not proving very successful for him at this moment, because he's being attacked from several sides. And the EU and President Vučić is in Spain, Seville, at a meeting today where the UN Secretary General Guterres is. President Vučić had a meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, with the Spanish Prime Minister. So there are ongoing discussions, and I'm sure that behind closed doors, there are many warnings that violence is not the way to go.
So what do you think should be the EU's response? Because it seems to be the case that President Vučić received some sort of backing from the Kremlin.
Yes, he did. It's rhetorical. Moscow is very far away. Serbia lives off the trade with the European Union. About 70% of Serbia's trade is with the EU. And really, Moscow is not the quote unquote savior in any way. We are anchored in the European Union in terms of bread and butter issues, in terms of employment. Germany creates, for example, close to 90,000 employments in Serbia. And so there's a clarity in terms of where Serbia is in real terms, not in what is rhetorically said or through the kind of symbolic politics that are being engaged in. What Russia does give to Serbia is very cheap gas at this moment, and gas is only about 15% of the overall gas, of the overall energy picture in Serbia, and it's mostly for heating cities.
So considering the escalation, what do you think we're going to see? What kind of scenarios are we going to encounter when it comes to Serbia and the protests? Are we to expect that there is going to be a shift happening domestically within the government, thinking, okay, there's something that has to be done in order for us to keep our position? Or are we perhaps going to see this civil protest grow to such size that it is actually going to lead to overthrowing of the government?
Well, the government has made many concessions. Let's remind viewers that the prime minister resigned several months ago. The mayor of this city, Novi Sad, resigned. There's a new prime minister who has nothing to do with politics. He's a member of the ruling party, but he's a professor of endocrinology. The government has tried to approach the students and the university that is the core of the rebellion. And the demand for the rule of law, I repeat, that is absolutely cardinal in this demand. So I think we're going to see a continuation. There were many people who said that the protests would die out over Christmas, over Easter. Now they're saying that they will die out over summer. I don't see that happening. It will take different forms. And this decision of students and citizens to block streets in cities in a very flexible and mobile way is a message to the government that they want to see some decision being taken so that there is a beginning of the unlocking of the crisis that society and state are in.
And just as we did a few months back, just as we're doing now, we're going to report more on the protests taking place in Serbia. Ivan Vejvoda, permanent fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna, was my guest. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation.
And so this would be all for now here on World Talks. Please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment, and we're going to see you there.